19-year-old Wayne Ramirez was killed instantly. The brake failure was caused by a defective valve. The government knew of this problem at least 3 years earlier. Despite federal vehicle safety laws, the defective valve was not recalled. 3 years later, in 1984, the valve was still being used in an estimated 45,000 Mack trucks. In 1937, more than 100 patients died after taking the drug elixir sulfanilamide. Many were children who were being treated for sore throats. Among the victims, 9-year-old Joan Nidifer of Tulsa, Oklahoma. One of the drug's ingredients was revealed to be a poisonous chemical used in antifreeze. At the time, there were no government regulations requiring the testing of such drugs for safety before they were sold. In 1906, many families were fearful about eating meat after learning that some of it had been prepared from diseased animals, often under unsanitary conditions, in the nation's big meat packing houses. In that period, there were no federal laws that effectively protected consumers against uninspected meat. Historically, the consumer has often been at risk, whether on the superhighways of the 1980s or in the apothecary shops of the 1880s. During the next hour, we will explore the record of a century of struggle to protect American consumers from unsafe food, drugs, and other products. We will see efforts by government to regulate the providers of the American dream or to have them regulate themselves. This is a look at the little-known history of a unique 20th century reform movement, the consumer movement. Often ephemeral, sometimes disorganized, frequently strident, occasionally misdirected, it is a movement that grew up with labor and the women's movement, and it is very much with us today. During this century, consumers in America have been a part of the biggest spending nation in the world. By 1984, $2,359 billion a year. They have been able to choose from more wonderfully wrought and designed goods and labor-saving devices than any other economy. And they have also experienced the darker side of the marketplace: recalls, deaths, injuries, and defective goods. There have been 3 periods in the history of consumer reform when protest was most organized and articulate. During the Progressive Era, when consumers were described as gullible victims. In the New Deal, when we were called guinea pigs, vulnerable to dangers from everyday foods, drugs, and other products. And in the 1960s and 70s, when consumer protest became part of a larger citizen movement. By the early 1960s, they were told by a president that they had certain rights: the right to choose, the right to know, the right to be safe, the right to be heard.
All of us are consumers. All of us deserve the right to be protected against fraudulent or misleading advertisements and labels, the right to be protected against unsafe or worthless drugs and other products, the right to choose from a variety of products at competitive prices.
The consumer's need to be protected has often been in conflict with the needs of business and government. By the late 1970s, this conflict focused on the question, do federal regulations improve conditions for consumers or make them worse?
Get government off the back of business and industry in America and the working man, and allow us to increase productivity.
Mr. Reagan's campaign phrase, getting the government off the backs of the people, really is getting the government off the backs of corporations, oil companies, insurance companies, in order to allow the corporations to get their hands into people's pockets. What really is at stake here is whether the government is going to enforce the law against corporate crime, fraud, and abuse, or whether it's going to be soft on corporate crime, fraud, and abuse, and not enforce the law.
I believe that by carrying out the mission that we have, enforcing the laws in the antitrust area and the consumer protection area, we have done the right thing. We have minimized the excesses that the agency had engaged in the past, and we've delivered the goods to the consumer and to the marketplace, making it an honest marketplace and making it a competitive marketplace.
Honesty, competition, choice. Are these values that government should define and uphold for consumers, or values that will emerge if private industry is left alone? The chairman of Foot, Cone, and Belding Advertising also heads the American Association of Advertising Agencies.
I hope that someday there will be absolutely no question about the consumer's interests and the advertiser's interests being identical, and advertising not only reflecting absolute accuracy in what it says, but also a recognition of the consumer's sense and sensibilities and treating that person like an adult human being.
Honesty, fair dealing are at the heart of what the consumer movement is after. Not just because individual consumers may win or lose a buck because of it, but these qualities, these values are at the heart of a civilized society. They're the building blocks of a civil society where we are all interdependent. And they are essential not only for the consumer, but for democracy to survive.
As early as the 18th century, the economist Adam Smith noted the tension between consumer and producer when he said that the sole end and purpose of production is consumption, and yet the interest of the consumer is almost constantly sacrificed to that of the producer. In the colonial era, the first laws to protect consumers